Okay, so first thing that I want to do here is to, link the live stream to some potential audience members. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, topic that I kind of want to cover in this one is the potential link between TI and anarchist views. So that's the topic, although the title of the stream itself, Infinity of Tangents, implies that topically we could go anywhere. Okay, copy. Okay, get my video link so that let's see. Okay, and since no one's watching anyway right now, I don't need to apologize for the pause. N Z N capital FS DW WX. Is that a 0 or an O? I'm guessing that's an O. Oh yeah, it's an O. Q. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Looks like we have 2 viewers, although I'm not sure if that includes myself. So maybe we only have 1 viewer. Anyway, I guess the topic that so the title of the live stream itself is kind of vague, but I kept it broad enough to kind of encompass some divergent conversation topics or live stream topics. The one of the things I was thinking about though, which I'll explain a little bit, and then viewers can posit questions, and then I'll answer the questions or try to engage with the questions, if not answer them. About potentially there being a link between introverted thinking and holding anarchist views, or at least leading to an anarchist result. I'm not saying that the function is going to be associated with that particular orientation on things. Obviously, I'm not saying that. But at least the logic that kind of underpins my thinking is that at least, I was having a conversation with a TI DOM, And yeah, so uh, as far as I understand the function, it's that process by which assumptions are questioned rather than made. And when you're in a mode of, uh, you know, not accepting anything necessarily, or at least recognizing the weaknesses in each assumption, it's more about the perception of how certain conventional assumptions we make end up being weak in unreconcilable ways. So at least that's what I associate. I don't think that that's what defines the function. I think that would be to reduce a really complex cognitive process, but I think that it's at least a natural byproduct of it. Um, in any case, I'm not saying that TI can't make assumptions. I'm saying that it's much less inclined to do so. Whereas I feel other types are more willing to adopt traditional assumptions to cover ground in a way intellectually, which I feel TI is, at least as far as I understand it, less inclined to do naturally. For the sake of persuasion, I think that it can do it. I just don't think that it necessarily finds it very easy. FI could be involved there as well, but in any case, uh, yeah. So as traditional institutions and practices and customs end up being questioned, you're not led to the conclusion of a stateless society, but you at least have to pass through, you have to pass through that phase almost, as you begin to question the legitimacy of um, specific traditional policies, customs, and institutions on purely logical grounds. So, as far as I can tell, among those who would identify as, I guess I have to define what I would mean by an anarchist position. I suppose what I mean by that is, well, I mean, whatever the conventional, I guess, whatever the common, the most common interpretation of that term is probably the valid one, um, in my view. Not necessarily believing in the absence of a state or any centralized organization in a society, um, more so questioning the legitimacy of a current social order and wanting to improve it or at least reduce it to its most essential components, in a minimalist sense. So, in any case, although I'm not exactly sure what people that identify as anarchists mean by that term, it could mean that uh, it could be some form of libertarianism where they think the state should simply be reduced to its essentials. Um, it could be, it could come from a place of either questioning the validity of authority to the extent that, so I guess that the TI logic that comes to mind for um, a stateless society or a society without centralized authority is that if you have no authority, you have no corrupt authority. If you have no authority, you have no inept authority. If you have no authority at all, you don't run the risk of having, bad authority. You also, on the other hand, um, if you choose to not have authority at all in a society, no centralized organization, you also wouldn't get the benefits of good authority or competent authority. So there's a balance to be struck there. No authority, no bad authority. On the other hand, no authority, no good authority. Because it's hard to get around the idea um, that much can be accomplished by vesting authority in a centralized organization socially. And I personally would not identify that way. I'm just saying that the rigorous questioning of institutions and customs very easily leads to that position, an anarchist frame of view, I guess, politically and philosophically. Um, so, yeah, Now, as I try to reason through it, it seems there are certain essential services um, that government exists to provide, and that it may be the case that government is a necessary condition to provide those services. I'm talking about like courts, right? So whether or not a government exists, an economy exists, and people exist, and families exist, and associations exist, and um, especially when it comes to the economy, protecting the at least justice in economic transactions in the form of contract enforcement via courts seems to me an essential function of government that you would not get with privatized courts or any sort of privatized mechanism. At least none come to mind. Um, because with any form of privatized institution, the potential for bias there is too great, and at least in contract enforcement and in courts, where justice is the ideal, at least the service to be rendered, you want to avoid bias at all costs, which is it may be an inherent part of any sort of privatized form of the same thing. So courts and police are two things that seem essential, although those don't necessarily have to be public institutions. They could very easily be. Uh, well, I mean, like I said, courts probably do have to be public institutions if we're going to allow for a government. And police, again, the potential for bias there in any privatized form of the same institution um, leads me to the conclusion that police are another thing. If we're going to allow for a government, then those are the two of the most essential functions. Now, in like classical libertarianism, you know, you have, I think there are like three essential functions, which the third doesn't come to mind. Courts and police are two that are very obvious. Um, in any case, stemming on courts, police, and I don't know. There's a third, or maybe even a fourth or a fifth. In classical libertarianism, there's that, there's the third branch that. So if I'm looking at the three branches of government we have now, no, that wouldn't be the source of the answer. I'm not sure. I guess I could look it up. The three essential functions of government. Okay, this is not. Wasn't able to reduce it to a convenient number of. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly what classical. I'm speaking for classical libertarians. I don't know. I mean, there are many different. The nature of libertarianism is idiosyncrasy, or at least that's what defines it. So I can't say. I mean, that may be the case defining it something that resists clear. I don't know. There are certain things that would resist clear definition like that by definition. Um, anyway, but I mean, economic regulation too seems to me. Also, I mean, if we're going to allow for a government, I mean, certain economic regulations also seem to be. Uh, oh, maybe it's currency, right? Maybe it's the courts, police, and currency. I mean, you could certainly have. I mean, obviously, with crypto and the way technology is moving, you could definitely have. Uh, you know, we have. You can have a primary currency, and then you can also have alternate currencies depending on the market and the good to be purchased. And I mean, it always makes sense to have backup currencies. That would be another tangent talking about currency, but that may be another essential function serving, ensuring that the economy, um, all economic transactions are carried out according to a minimum standard of value in the form of a currency that is printed, maintained, and regulated by the state. In any case, it's just interesting to me to think about whether TI is any more predisposed to uh, those sorts of views. Now, I wouldn't say that it's the only function that could potentially be led to that result. Um, anarchist views being the result. I mean, I do think there may be some link between political affiliation and personality. I mean, that to me doesn't strike me as a totally a radical conclusion, but um, I mean, for one thing, I read a study. Uh, well, this was a while ago. I might have read multiple studies, but the topic was on how conservatives and liberals have different brain structures, and their anatomy is their neuroanatomy is different in statistically significant ways. Um, Now, I couldn't. My memory doesn't serve me well enough to be able to go into the mechanics of the study's method or anything like that. I know that it was a good study, or else I wouldn't have written about it for a school paper. In any case, I mean, the sample seemed to be decent, as decent as a sample for this type of thing can be. In any case, um, so the study's conclusion: conservatives apparently, right? So we're talking about like, well, I mean, I feel like if you're a conservative, you're a conservative. That's a term that transcends national boundaries. And in terms of its link to personality, it's not tied to any specific nationality. In any case, conservatives, I'll simplify it, although I don't like doing that. Conservatives have larger amygdala structures in their brain with statistical significance, and liberals, there were multiple regions that were implicated with liberals. I'm not exactly sure. I forgot what exact regions. I think it was some part of the prefrontal cortex, which that's vague because it's pretty large. That encompasses different brain structures, but in any case, but the point about the amygdala, right, being larger with conservatives, or at least more active, doesn't necessarily have to be larger. I don't know how they measured activity. I don't know if it was done in terms of size, which isn't a very good heuristic. You'd have to go with blood flow or other measurements of activity. In any case, conservatives have that larger. Well, I say larger, right, assuming that that's the size is the heuristic they used. But I think it was a larger amygdala. In any case, you get the point. It's a more active in that region. The amygdala is like responsible for like fear processing, and it's part of the. I believe the thalamus is responsible for the release of all of your stress hormones um, in moments of perceived danger, like cortisol and noradrenaline, adrenaline. Um, in any case, conservatives have more activity in this region, according to this study. Um, in any case, and I think the study was actually sort of a master study that took the conclusions of enough. So that's why my doubts about the sample are pretty minimal. I think it was. I think this was a study with a good time series too. So it definitely had ran over a sufficient period of time. In any case, if we think about how conservatives psychologically operate, it's this. Well, the way that I define conservatism, I guess I have to start with that, is that it's the wanting to preserve um, tradition or some previously existing something. It's the assumption that something has validity because other people in the past assumed that it did and believe that it did. It's wanting to preserve um, a certain customs that are more or less arbitrarily, but there may be intellectualized forms of conservatism too, where you have good reasons to believe that these traditions should be upheld. But generally speaking, the impulse is that we should preserve tradition because tradition is tradition, and whatever. There is a projected significance onto tradition, things that have been done in the past. Coming from this fallacy that things were better the way they were, or when, to me, people and societies don't really change. They're just exposed to different conditions. The fundamentals are all still I mean, obviously we evolved, but we don't, not in the time scale that humans have since the Enlightenment. You can't say that we've only I mean, you're right. I mean, our ideas and discourse and what types of things have become popular have evolved, and discourse has evolved, and ideas about the structure about the universe have evolved, and maybe we could say they've refined. Probably have. Depending on what views we're talking about, and you can't really make a general statement like that with regard to every particular scientific advancement or theory. But in general, uh, the impulse behind conservatism is one. But at the same time, the amygdala is involved in this because it's the it's being fearful essentially of new developments and uh, change. And to me, that seems at the core of the wanting to preserve the way things were. It's the preference for it's the ain't broke, don't fix principle, or maybe something not even that sophisticated. Maybe it's just an impulse that we have, and it may not be unique to conservatives, liberals, and conservatives, right? I mean, it's not a binary. Although, depending on how you define conservative and liberal, it may be a binary, depending on how loosely you define the terms. In any case, you get the point, right? I mean, and the amygdala's involvement as the fear center being fearful of new change, that's the link between, that study's findings and what I'm talking about being. So in any case, uh, but to me, what defines introverted thinking is, and it may not be just introverted thinking. I mean, extroverted thinking, either introverted or extroverted, could I mean have the same attitude toward tradition. And but it just seems to me, I mean, explaining with any of these cognitive functions, it's hard to explain like a mechanism, because we have to assume we're working within a frame, in the sense that we're assuming that these things exist, and that. But of course, I just see the cognitive functions as categorizing different ways of thinking, and conceivably there could be more than eight, in my view. I mean, we don't necessarily have to reduce right to the ones that have already been recognized. Of course, then that would throw a wrench in the system as it currently exists, and then it would be mostly unusable until we could reconcile the new functions that we identify with the old, and then try to integrate those in some non uh, chaotic way into the existing system, which probably would be impossible, depending on what other ways of thinking and other cognitive processes you can conceive of. But in any case, that's just, I don't know. I'm spitballing here with regard to the connection between TI and you know anarchist views, or any sort of um, I don't know. And maybe there. Okay, so this is what I was going to talk about earlier. There may be some involvement with FI as well. Like, I feel like a lot of people that take libertarian positions, or similarly, uh, positions that similarly seek to reduce the government to, its essentials in size and power, which the reduction in power to me does not seem to be all that ridiculous, even as a someone that would identify as both a socialist and an individualist. But I mean, I can get into those, how I would define both those terms and what that means later too. But um, in any case, it could also be so coming to a position as an anarchist, or becoming that in your political philosophical orientation about things, about the beliefs about the state, could be like not only to that could come not only from just rigid, or not rigid, but rigorous questioning of institutions as they currently exist. So, okay, I see that, this particular rule is invalid. Let's just do away with that process of questioning the rules, doing away with rules, modifying the rules, ultimately produces the chaos that our government of separated powers and process attempts to channel, and control by creating that process for change. without which, right? I mean, if that was the intelligence, at least that to me, that should be the recognized sophistication with the American government, right? And the United States government. Um, if it's all that sophisticated, I will leave to the judgment of other minds. I mean, I'd have to think about it more. I don't know. I mean, it certainly is a good way of theoretically, even if the theory that I'm talking about motivated them, probably did. I can't see another reason for wanting to all of the different constitutional mechanisms that were put into place to ensure that uh, the government remained stable but also democratic, and oftentimes democracy and social stability um, throughout history. Um, they're obviously not mutually exclusive. I mean, we live in a very democratic world with many very successful democratic societies. They're not pure democracies, though, and I don't need to go into the distinction between a direct democracy and a representative one. And we, in some ways, there is no such thing as a pure democracy anymore. I don't think that there's a currently existing example. Um, it may call itself that, but technically speaking, in political science, we wouldn't say that it's a pure democracy. I mean, there are what we see now with most democratic states is an integration of concepts of Republican, Democrat, and democratic government, and so and whatever the classical meaning of the terms were, I'm not a political scientist, but in any case, see, this is why I called the title an infinity of tangents, because I feel like I'm very far from where I started, but trying to connect this back to the oh yeah, okay, so in any case, yeah, ti might not be the only function that's commonly associated with dominant ti or whatever, I don't know. So it could be, so some people, right, so some people that end up taking a libertarian or an anarchist position or government reduction, right, a position based on small government, and a small government person can either be, well, it could be very intellectual in the sense that they could simply be questioning rules on a logical basis, questioning the legitimacy of rules, and that can lead them to a minimalist government approach, and that's fine. But that's a very different process from the process by which rules are questioned via a process of logic and evidence is a very different way of arriving at the same result than the path that maybe some others might take to the same position. So FI might be associated with these types of position too, because it's about individuality. It's, in my view, very linked to self-preservation and idea. Well, I won't. The language I was about to use would badmouth uh, people that lead with the function in general. Although in the past, I thought, well, a lot of what FI ends up being is like ideation about the self, or values that are subjective, or principles that are subjectively derived, or something like that. So that's how I thought about it in the past. It may be many things, doesn't have to be one thing, but um, we always have the tendency when talking about these types of things to want to reduce them to a quality that stands out the most, so that then we can begin to differentiate, when really many things could define what a dominant FI person would look like politically. Um, Really, FI doesn't. I mean, with some functions, you can say, "Oh, well, that's going to lead to them being more progressive or more conservative." I mean, just the cognitive process operating as we define the functions. Those cognitive processes produce certain ways of thinking, and predispose an individual to certain perspectives. They're logical, if not logical results. They're natural byproducts, if not logical byproducts of you know um, the cognitive functions operating in their consciousness. So in any case, I only mention FI with anarchist views because it's almost like it. You can